thanks very much. Well, I don't think I'm going to wait for the whole music to come. Does anyone recognise where the music's from? No, just me. Is it really just me that recognises this? It's from a game called The Impossible Game, which the trick at that's The Impossible Game. Yeah, and it has this really cool soundtrack, and you can only get it if you can actually do The Impossible Game. So I recommend trying it. It's an old, slightly old now, three or 4 years old. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. My name's Toby Beresford. As Michael was saying, I came at gamification really from a social media background. That's where I came. I was making social games, but primarily I've been very interested in the business use of social media. And the interesting story really is that last night I was sending a direct message to a lady who was who used to be the Prime Minister of New Zealand, used to be the overall boss of the United Nations Development Programme, which is, if you have any kind of link with the UN, that's really one of the bigger parts of the UN, which is tasked with development and looking after kind of how do we bring the sort of for example, the 2.5 billion people who don't have a bank account, how do we bring them into the rest of the world? So it's a pretty important person in the world of the UN, and I had no contact with her, and I had no links to her. In fact, I had no links to the UN, and yet somehow I am sending her a direct message, at 10 o'clock at night before a gamification conference. And the question really is not how interesting that I'm doing that. The question is why. Why is she interested at all in me and what I'm doing? And I think hopefully over this presentation you'll perhaps find a glimpse, and we'll perhaps be able to solve that mystery together. My story in social media began most interestingly in 2007. I heard about this thing called Facebook that was set to be possibly big, and I set up the Facebook Developer Garage here in the UK, and I thought, I'm going to get 10 like-minded nerds and developers along who are going to be interested in this new thing. And I booked out a bar, and we had 300 people turn up. So suddenly there's this big difference between what I saw Facebook as being and what the rest of the world saw Facebook as being. And that's been borne out. You're now all familiar with the stats. There's 2 billion people on Facebook. There's still 5 billion who are not, but we'll see, won't we? I then set up an agency called Nudge. So in terms of sort of behavioral economics and nudging people, how do we use this new social media to nudge people, in this case for marketing? And I sold that to another big social media agency called Syncaps, and I went from a kind of a small Greek Street office into suddenly we were in this very sort of swanky office and with a reception, which seems to be what you do when you have a swanky office. It's also often the sort of the end of a company when you have time to have a reception, and the definite end is if there's a goldfish in a fish tank in the reception, that company's finished. Okay, sorry if you've seen that. So. So we went from that, and I actually went from that, and I said, okay, well, what if I start up something else? So I'd like to start something in gamification. So I left that office and went to this office, which is my shed in the garden, and I started a new journey. The journey that I started was around gamification of work. So I thought, well, maybe we can make work a bit more, inverted commas, fun, get people more engaged in their work. And so I created this startup called Pails, P-A-I-L-Z. And the idea was that when you did your work, you'd put the work into a bucket, and somebody else would take that work out of the bucket, and they'd get points for doing it. And we sort of came up with something that looked a bit like this. I got a business process management sort of guru on board with me, and we came up with the Pails dashboard, which would link to your business process management system, and you'd see these different tasks. And we then had the public launch. And I got like sort of 300 mugs created. I had little stands like this, all with pails, and I was like, this is going to be it. I'm going to get pails out there. You know, everybody's going to love this. And the only people who came, I knew there was a problem, because the only people who came to my event were my family and friends. And in fact, my co-founder didn't actually even make it. So, so we knew there was something wrong with pails. Also, about the same sort of time, a couple of American companies just launched with $10 million of funding, doing very similar task management things, which you know as Trello or Asana. And so actually, we suddenly found that pails fails, and as someone told me it would, and it did. And it was a bit of a sort of a sad sort of failure for me, because I was very excited about gamification. I was excited about the gamification of work. I was excited about the potential, but yet this first rendition of it, this rendering of it in a format called Pails, just didn't happen. There was one little kind of chink of light in my Pails fails journey, and that I was sitting in my parents' house, actually, in my parents-in-law's house, and I thought, well, how am I going to get the word out there? The only people who are interested in me and what I'm doing so far seem to be my existing network, my friends. And I said, what about if I create a top 10 list? So I said, okay, well, who can I do a top 10 list of? And I thought, well, why don't I do a top 10 list of the Gamification Gurus? And I did, and I created this top 10 list. And my blog, which up to that date had been sort of hovering around at the sort of the 10s and 20s of viewers, suddenly I published this top 10 gamification list, and whoa, there was this spike on the blog. And I thought, oh, that's very strange. And so all these people had suddenly been interested in this strange top 10 list. And the thing that was different about it, that I had no idea at the time, is that it wasn't a subjective list. It wasn't just Toby's view on who the Gamification Gurus is, which if you look at most lists, that is. If you look at the Forbes Top 250, if you look at even the Oscars, all of these lists that we all see are all subjective. They're a bunch of very intelligent experts who sit behind closed doors who come up with the list of who are the experts. So I'd created this objective list based at the time on a tool called a Peer Index. I then did it the following month based on Clout with a few extras, and whoosh, another huge spike. So not only were the Gamification Gurus themselves interested in what was their score, where did they rank, actually their followers were interested in what was the score and what was the rank. And so what we found is that the Gamification Gurus became a thing. And I don't know why it became, I don't know why, what I discovered is that people were very interested to know what was my score on social media, how am I doing, and how am I doing versus my peers. And even back in, and what then happened was that the ranking evolved, and people said, well, I don't just want to be scored on clout, I want to be scored on how much I know about gamification. I want to be scored on how well I'm doing at promoting gamification. So the scoring algorithm behind the scorecard started to change and evolve over time. And because I'm a techie, I thought, this was taking me 3 days a month to produce, and I thought, I can't be doing with that. So what I did is I created a piece of software that would collect all the scores, calculate the algorithm, and then spit it out in lots of different formats. And that piece of software is now called rise.global, and we're delighted to be here today, and thank you for putting us on your poster. Okay, whoa. So now, time for some interaction. You're going to be turning to the person on your left or right, and what I'd like you to do is to ask them about their social media. So ask them about their business use of social media. So what social media channels do you run, and the other question is how do you see the success of those? How do you track the success? So you've got 2 minutes to have a chat to your neighbour. Okay, thank you. Right. So that's it. That's your 2 minutes. I know you're going to be continuing these conversations. Okay. Right. Yeah, thank you. Right, 2 minutes. Could you, could somebody tell me, based on the other person you were talking to, could you just tell me what the social network was that they were using for business use, and how did they describe success on it? So, of the people you were talking to, so you remember back. You can ask again quickly if you can't remember. No, okay. Go.
To get to the top of the Gamification Gurus leaderboard.
Okay, we can discuss that later. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Colleague here is from a little-known software company called Microsoft, and they have utilised Xbox players to use Twitter to answer each other's questions about gameplay and solving problems, kind of outsourcing technical support to the social environment.
How do you describe success?
Is getting people who are using the games and using the systems to actually answer the questions that, otherwise they'd have to pay a technician to scan all the feeds to do that.
Did he have a metric involved? Did he give you any numbers? No, he didn't. Oh, okay, well done. Okay, good. Anyone else? Yep. Jeremy Carr.
Hi, Mac here. The colleague over here gave a very good example of LinkedIn. So when you accept LinkedIn connections, you usually say thank you, but she's using some strategy, kind of saying back, why are you connecting with us? Is there anything we can do together? And suddenly you are seeing a conversion rather than 10 acceptance. She's actually got 2 leads, concrete one, and she's improving that even further. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, so it's just engaging really directly with people. It's like, well, if you've taken the, because normally it's just so anonymous. So it's actually making things much more personal. So it's not necessarily gamifying it, but it's actually, it's taking that connection, almost taking the connection back from the social sphere and making it a very personal connection. And it's had, literally, I've had sort of 20% return on acceptance, whereas normally those people would just become part of the mush. And it's actually direct sales.
Thanks, Heather.
Excellent. No, that's brilliant. Thank you. So 2 really good examples there. One of Microsoft using its users to talk to each other. Another one of engaging on Facebook. And you'll notice something very interesting about both of those examples of what success is that neither of them said success for me is my number of Twitter followers. Success for me is my number of connections on LinkedIn. Now, the trouble is that both those networks, the one number that they advertise to you consistently is both of those metrics. We are all told how many Twitter followers we have, how many Facebook likes we have, how many connections we have. So the interesting thing is that the scorecard that the platforms are giving you isn't the scorecard you want, is it? It's not. If you just accept this scorecard from them, you're marching to their tune. So and what we call those we call those vanity metrics. So vanity metrics is there's a real plague of vanity metrics in the social media world, in our social media businesses, because vanity metrics are kind of how other people track us. They're how we compared. Let me compare Michael to Toby because Michael's got X thousand followers versus Toby. That's fine from an external point of view, but it's just how they track. It doesn't say who's getting business return on investment. So the interesting thing really about metrics is that we need to move from vanity metrics, which are those which are imposed on us by others, to clarity metrics. And clarity metrics are those that we choose ourselves as business people, as we choose, and both of you gave examples of engagement metrics, and engagement's a fantastic metric. If you've got an audience, it's much more interesting to know if they're engaged with you than if they're just simply sitting there doing nothing. And so what this gives us is a real sense that in terms of social media success, if we stop measuring the vanity metrics and stop just accepting what other people give us, but actually look at the scorecard for ourselves and say, what are the clarity metrics, it becomes very interesting. And as gamification experts, we should, when we go into a business, we're all about metrics. There's a score, we put things in. We need to be getting our clients involved in the clarity metrics because that's where the really interesting conversations are. just as I promised to talk about the UN, so I launched a clarity metric type program for the United Nations from a hackathon. Okay, so there's this funny hackathon. I launched it with a couple of key presses, and out it went into the ether. I pinged all of the United Nations head honchos with a Twitter reply saying, this is your score. This is how you are doing on social media. And it was based on clout, which is actually an engagement, a measure of engagement rather than reach. And they were instantly interested. They were hooked because they wanted to know, how am I doing? They didn't know. Twitter was just telling them how many followers they had. What was much more interesting is when we said, you're Helen Clark, you're doing better than the head of the UNDP is doing better than the head of the UNHCR, and the head of the UNHCR is doing better than the Secretary General, and suddenly they're all talking amongst themselves, no matter how senior they are. And here they are. So this is the latest one, and it's been going for a couple of years, and they're sort of shown. They are shown on a leaderboard, but we're trying to sort of downplay the leaderboard aspect of it in terms of the narrative. We're trying to. I love the collective journey, which is about the collective journey of all the top 500 UN people. So it's about the staff themselves, all tweeting together, all creating a social presence together that will promote the work of the UN. So it's a really good thing that they're all doing. They can drill down into their personal scorecard, so they can see my score, and that's really interesting. And I think the last thing I just want to kind of leave you with is one of these, my kind of key learning around dashboards and scores. So we've talked a bit about external analytics. So this is where somebody else measures you, okay? We've all seen it. I've been measured by someone else, and I look at the analytics. The traditional business, most business people that you meet will say what you need to solve this problem is a dashboard. So you can get, like, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of companies that will sell you a social dashboard. Hundreds. I just went through the ones beginning with S. Simply Measured, Sendable, Sumall. There's so many of them, but they're all selling a really rather dull dashboard with lots of lights flashing, but you never look at it. You get it all set up. You look at it. It's a kind of a false sort of security, because you think that you've got it all under control by setting up an analytics dashboard, but actually you're not using it. The real secret, and we as gamifiers know it, is it's only when you can link your analytics to your actual goals, whether it's engagement, whether it's reach, whatever it is, and track it back to a scorecard. How am I doing how's my score against where I want to be? That's when we actually kind of start to improve. We start to progress, because we can see, am I doing better against myself? So here's me, I'm doing it myself. You always have to eat your own dog food, don't you? I have actually eaten dog food but I won't do it on video, but I will. Here's me, so I'm trying to improve my Twitter score, so I've created a Twitter scorecard just for me, and I track all sorts of things. I'm still working out exactly what I want to track, but I can track all the different followers and metrics, but I can condense it into a single score that I see, which is linked to my business goals. So this is my scorecard, my business goals, my Twitter score, and I compare it against the sort of people that I'm kind of my peers each month. And I'm on my tool on rise.global. I can go in, I can change I change all the metrics. So all the different metrics come in, and I can then weight them. I say, okay, this one's worth 10% of the score, this one's worth 20%, this is worth 2 points, this is capped. But I've got a tool that allows me to create a scorecard that's relevant to me. And that, to me, is the next kind of evolution of business dashboards. We go away from analytics, which is just flying and visualization, and we move towards scorecards, which are actually linked to business objectives. And that is very gamified. So there we go. I hope that's been a useful insight into what I do. And obviously, we're always looking for support for the United Nations Social 500. There's the code for the app, and I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Toby Beresford.